Have you ever wondered if choosing your safety over a destructive marriage would condemn your soul forever? This question tormented me every single day as my husband's fists replaced his words. My name is Sarah, and I'm a 34-year-old registered nurse from Denver who always believed divorce meant eternal damnation. I attended church faithfully, followed scripture devotedly, yet faced an impossible choice: stay and risk my life, or leave and risk my soul. What I discovered during 8 minutes of clinical death will shatter everything you think you know about divine love and judgment. This revelation about God's true heart toward broken marriages didn't just change my life. It could transform how you understand divine mercy forever. I was raised in a strict Christian household where divorce was considered the ultimate sin. My mother would quote scripture about how God hates divorce, how marriage is sacred until death. When I married David at 25, I believed it was forever, no matter what. But forever turned into 9 years of walking on eggshells, of making excuses for bruises, of praying desperately for him to change, while secretly wondering if I deserved this suffering. The theological questions consumed my nights like relentless vultures. Was I supposed to endure this forever? If I left, would I be condemned? The church leaders I confided in spoke of submission, of prayer, of God's plan. But what if God's plan included my destruction? Imagine carrying a question so heavy it steals your sleep. What if staying meant dying, but leaving meant eternal damnation? These doubts consumed me as I sat in my car outside our house one autumn evening, watching David pace angrily through the living room window. I'd been working a double shift at the hospital, and I knew he'd been drinking. The familiar knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I gripped the steering wheel and whispered the same prayer I'd said 1,000 times. God, please show me what to do. I'm so lost. What happened next would answer that prayer in the most extraordinary way imaginable. What I'm about to share will challenge everything you believe about divine judgment. As I walked up the driveway, David burst through the front door, his face red with rage. "Where the hell have you been?" He slurred, the smell of whiskey heavy on his breath. I tried to explain about the emergency at the hospital, but his hand struck my face before I could finish the sentence. The force sent me stumbling backward, my head hitting the concrete garage wall with a sickening crack. The world spun. Blood trickled down my neck. But it wasn't just the physical impact that shattered something inside me. It was the realization that this cycle would never end, not unless I chose to end it. Even as darkness crept into my vision, my last coherent thought was a desperate plea. God, if you're real, if you love me, please help me understand what I should do. Then everything went black. I don't remember the ambulance ride or arriving at the emergency room where I'd worked countless shifts. I don't remember my colleagues frantically trying to stabilize me as a subdural hematoma pressed against my brain. All I remember is the moment Dr. Martinez looked at the clock and said the words that would change everything. Time of death, 11:47 p.m. But I wasn't dead. Not in the way I'd always imagined death. Instead, I found myself floating above my own body, watching the medical team I'd worked alongside for years now, fighting desperately to bring me back. I could see my physical form on the gurney, pale still, connected to machines that showed flat lines. Yet I felt more alive than I had in years. The pain was gone. The fear was gone. For the first time in so long, I felt free. I watched Dr. Martinez compress my chest, while Jenny, my closest friend at the hospital, administered medications with tears streaming down her face. I wanted to tell her I was okay, that this strange floating sensation was somehow beautiful. But she couldn't. "Hear me. Nobody could see me hovering there, observing my own resuscitation with a curious detachment. The light started as a warm glow at the edge of my perception, like sunrise breaking through morning mist. But this wasn't ordinary light. It pulsed, with life, with intelligence, with a love so pure. It made my heart ache with recognition. I'd been searching for this feeling my entire life, without knowing what I was looking for. It was unconditional acceptance, complete understanding, perfect peace. The light grew brighter, and I felt myself being drawn toward it, not pulled exactly, but invited, called, as if someone I'd been longing to meet was finally calling me. Home. I left the hospital room behind, floating through walls and spaces that had no meaning anymore. The city of Denver spread below me like a jeweled carpet, but I was moving beyond earthly geography now. I was traveling through dimensions I'd never imagined, toward a realm where physical laws held no power. The sensation was indescribable. I wasn't walking or flying. I was simply being moved by intention, by desire, by an invisible current of love that carried me towards something magnificent. The light ahead grew more intense, more welcoming, more alive with each passing moment. I could feel warmth radiating from it, not the heat of fire, but the warmth of coming home after a long, difficult journey. As I drew closer, I began to perceive that this wasn't just light. It was presence. Someone was there waiting for me, and the anticipation made my soul sing with joy. Every question that had tortured me, every doubt that had haunted my prayers, every fear that had paralyzed my choices, all of it melted away like ice under summer sun. I was about to encounter truth itself. The realm around me began to take shape, though shape is too limiting a word for what I experienced. I was entering a space that existed beyond human comprehension, where colors had emotions and sounds had texture, where thoughts became visible and love could be touched. It was a place that felt simultaneously foreign and familiar, as if I'd been born knowing it existed, but had forgotten until this moment. The light ahead pulsed with gentle rhythm, like a heartbeat made of pure radiance. I could sense vast intelligence, within it, ancient wisdom, infinite compassion. This was the presence I'd been praying to all my life, I realized. This was the God I'd been trying to understand through human interpretations and religious doctrines. And he was nothing like what I'd been taught to fear. As I approached the source of the light, a figure began to emerge from within the radiance, tall, graceful, with eyes that held all the love in the universe and hands that had shaped stars. I knew immediately who this was, though he looked nothing like the paintings in my childhood Sunday school classroom. This was Jesus, but not the stern judge I'd been taught to expect. This was love incarnate, mercy personified, truth itself standing before me with arms outstretched in welcome. The presence became overwhelming, and then I saw him. Jesus appeared before me in a radiance of pure love that made every earthly light seem like a flickering candle. His eyes held the depth of eternity, filled with compassion that washed over me like warm honey on wounded skin. I felt completely exposed, yet completely accepted at the same time. This wasn't the angry judge I'd feared all my life. This was love itself, standing before me in human form. My child. His voice resonated through my being, not as sound, but as pure understanding flowing directly into my soul. You carry such heavy burdens. Tell me what troubles your heart the most. I found myself speaking without hesitation, the question that had tormented me during those final moments of my earthly life pouring out. Lord, I need to know, what happens to people who divorce? Are they condemned to hell? I've struggled with this question my entire marriage, and I died still not knowing if staying in an unhappy marriage was worth my salvation. I expected judgment. I expected a stern lecture about the sanctity of marriage and the consequences of breaking sacred vows. But what happened next completely shattered everything I thought I knew about divine love. Jesus smiled with such gentleness that tears of liquid starlight seemed to flow from his eyes. "My beloved daughter, you've been carrying chains that were never meant for you. Let me show you what love truly means." What he showed me next would shatter every religious assumption I'd ever held. Suddenly, the space around us transformed. I could see couples throughout history, some staying together through genuine love and commitment, others trapped in cycles of pain and destruction. I watched marriages that reflected God's love through mutual respect and support. But I also witnessed relationships where staying together meant spiritual death for both partners, where children learned that love meant enduring abuse, where the sacred bond had become a prison. "Do you see?" Jesus asked, his voice like wind through ancient trees. "I never intended marriage to be a cage that destroys the souls I love so dearly. When humans created laws that trap people in relationships that harm rather than heal, they spoke in my name, but not from my heart. Have you ever realized that some of our deepest religious fears might be human constructions rather than divine truths?" The revelation was staggering. "But the church teaches that divorce is a sin that leads to damnation," I whispered. His response changed everything. "My dear child, I judge the heart, not the circumstances. A person who stays in a destructive marriage out of fear of hell while their soul withers, is that really honoring the sacred? And someone who leaves a relationship that has become toxic, not out of selfishness but to preserve the divine spark within them and protect their children, how is that not an act of love?" I felt the weight of decades lifting from my soul like heavy armor finally being removed after a long, exhausting war. All those years of staying in a loveless marriage, convincing myself that my misery was righteous, that my children's exposure to constant tension was somehow holy sacrifice. I had been so wrong. What Jesus showed me next will forever change how you understand God's heart toward broken marriages. "But what about the scripture that says you hate divorce?" I asked, still grappling with lifelong teachings. Jesus' expression filled with infinite tenderness. "I hate the pain that leads to divorce. I hate when love dies. I hate when people hurt each other so deeply that they cannot find their way back to unity. But I never hate the people who find themselves in these circumstances, and I never condemn someone for choosing healing over continued harm." The scene around us shifted again, and I saw myself in my marriage, truly saw it for the first time. I witnessed the slow erosion of respect, the way my husband's criticism had dimmed my light year after year, how our children had learned to navigate emotional landmines daily. I saw how staying had not preserved anything sacred. It had slowly poisoned the divine love within our entire family. "You thought you were being faithful to me by enduring," Jesus said softly. "But faithfulness to divine love sometimes means having the courage to say no more to what destroys it. Some of my most beloved servants have found their true calling only after leaving relationships that kept them small and wounded. I watched scene after scene of my life replay with new understanding. The nights I'd prayed desperately for strength to endure another day. The way I'd taught my daughter that women should accept being diminished for the sake of marriage. The slow death of my own dreams and aspirations as I convinced myself that sacrifice meant self-destruction. "What about commitment?" I asked, What about keeping promises? True commitment is to the highest good of all involved, Jesus replied. When staying becomes an act of fear rather than love, when promises are kept at the cost of destroying souls, that is not commitment. That is spiritual suicide. I want my children to thrive, to grow, to become all they were created to be. Sometimes that requires the courage to release what is no longer serving love. The truth hit me like lightning, splitting the darkness of a lifetime of confusion. I had confused martyrdom with righteousness. I had believed that suffering in silence made me holy, when in reality, it had slowly hollowed me out like termites, destroying a beautiful house from within. What Jesus revealed next transformed my understanding completely. Jesus continued, his words reshaping my entire understanding of divine love. In the kingdom of heaven, we celebrate when someone chooses healing over harm, when they honor the divine spark within them enough to seek relationships that nurture rather than destroy. The hell you feared for divorcing was actually the hell you were living by staying. I began to sob tears of pure relief. I wasted so many years believing I had to choose between my marriage and my salvation. No years are wasted when they lead to wisdom, he assured me. Your suffering has given you compassion for others who carry the same burdens. Now you understand that my love is not a contract with harsh penalties. It is a river of grace that flows toward healing and wholeness. The space around us filled with others who had struggled with similar questions. People who had left marriages to escape abuse, those who had divorced to protect their children, individuals who had chosen authenticity over appearances. I saw how their courage to choose love over fear had not condemned them, but liberated them to become vessels of even greater divine love. When you return to life, Jesus said, his words carrying the weight of destiny, you will know that my love is bigger than human institutions, that my grace extends beyond human rules. You will help others understand that seeking healthy relationships is not rebellion against God. It is alignment with divine love. The revelation was complete, and I felt my consciousness beginning to shift. The divine presence that surrounded me started to fade, but the love remained embedded in every cell of my being. I was returning to my body, but I was returning transformed. The hospital room materialized around me gradually, like emerging from deep underwater into harsh fluorescent reality. The beeping machines, the smell of antiseptic, the weight of my physical form. All of it came flooding back like a tide I couldn't resist. But I was no longer the woman who had coded on that operating table. The fear that had defined my marriage, my faith, and my entire adult life was gone, replaced by an unshakable knowing that would change everything. I opened my eyes to see my husband holding my hand, tears streaming down his face. "Thank God you're back," he whispered. I thought I'd lost you, but looking at him now, with the clarity of divine revelation still fresh in my soul, I realized the truth. I hadn't been lost. I had been found. The woman he thought he'd almost lost had actually died on that table. The person opening her eyes was someone completely new, someone who finally understood that God's love was not a prison but a liberation. Over the following days, as I recovered physically, I began to live emotionally and spiritually for the first time in decades. The courage that divine encounter had awakened in me grew stronger with each passing moment, like a flame that had been waiting years for oxygen. I realized that staying in my marriage would not honor God. It would dishonor the profound truth I'd been shown about divine love. But how do you explain to a world built on fear that sometimes leaving is the most sacred choice you can make? 6 months later, I filed for divorce. Not out of anger or spite, but out of love. Love for myself, love for my children, and love for the divine spark within me that deserved to shine. My husband was shocked. My church was scandalized. But I carried within me the unshakable knowledge of what I'd experienced in that heavenly realm. The woman who had lived in fear of hell for divorcing discovered that hell was actually living without authentic love. The God I'd met in that divine encounter wanted me whole, wanted me thriving, wanted me to model healthy love for my children rather than normalize dysfunction. Through those 8 minutes of clinical death, I received the answer to the question that had tormented me for years. I learned that God's love doesn't condemn us for choosing healing. It celebrates when we finally have the courage to honor the divine spark within us. The fear of eternal damnation that kept me trapped was never from divine love at all. Today, I share this revelation not to encourage anyone to abandon their marriage lightly, but to free people from the same paralyzing fear that kept me trapped for so long. Divine love is not about enduring harm in the name of holiness. It's about having the courage to choose relationships that honor the sacred within us all. If you're struggling with similar questions about relationships, faith, and what God truly wants for your life, I want you to know that you are more loved than you can imagine. The divine heart breaks not when we choose healing over harm, but when we choose fear over the fullness of life we were created to experience. The truth I discovered in that heavenly realm changed everything. Sometimes leaving is the most sacred choice you can make. If this story has stirred something in your heart, if you recognize yourself in my struggle between religious obligation and personal well-being, you're not alone in wrestling with these profound questions. Have you ever felt trapped between what others say is right and what your soul knows is true? Have you wondered if choosing your well-being makes you selfish or spiritual? I'd love to hear about your own journey in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to find their own courage to choose authentic love over fear.